Hello, I'm Vic Allen. August 1968 saw the end of steam on British railways. Now, August the 11th, to be precise, had come and gone after the famous 15 guinea special. A blanket ban on the use of steam on British Railways main line was imposed, and steam photographers like myself were wandering around in a state of utter desolation. It wasn't until October 1971 that the ban was broken by a special train sponsored by Bulmers of Hereford and hauled by Great Western King 6000 King George V. In the meantime, yes, there were the odd industrial sites, coal mines and the like, in places like South Wales and Northumberland, and a quarry in Kent, and one could go abroad. Some very fine steam locomotives were still working, namely express trains like the Fleche or the Golden Arrow, to and from Calais, just across the English Channel. But based in London, I needed a regular fix of steam on my doorstep, and there it was in the form of ex-Great Western 57XX 060 pannier tanks working for London Transport. These engines had replaced earlier steam engines on London Transport in the late 50s and early 60s, and worked ballast and rubbish trains and engineering works trains, mostly at night, during those few hours when the normal underground services did not run and the current was switched off. So it was hard to get any reasonable shots of these trains at work. Occasionally I would risk life and limb climbing onto the parapets of the few bridges that crossed the line between King's Cross and Farringdon to photograph the few trains that ran in daylight. However, at the depot where they were based, it might be a different matter. There were two, Lillie Bridge in West London and Neasden in the northwest suburbs of London, on the Bakerloo and Metropolitan lines. I lived close to the latter, and as I had for some time been perfecting the technique of time exposures using my 6.6 by 6 centimetre Rolleiflex camera, I guessed that there would be adequate lighting on shed to secure some interesting pictures. But how to get in? I had done enough bunking of British railway sheds over the past 12 years to know that shed masters or foremen's attitudes to train spotters varied widely. At some, the shout of "Oi, you, get out!" was a familiar greeting. At others, you could wander around pretty much unchallenged. Neasden BR shed was one of those. But my plan for Neasden LT depot involved two extra hazards. Firstly, I needed to go at night. Secondly, much of it was electrified. The steam shed was only a small part of the main depot, where the 1938 Bakerloo line stock and the Metropolitan A60 stock were housed and serviced. I had no idea exactly where, within this huge complex, the steam shed was situated. But I was in luck, thanks to one of my very close railway enthusiast friends, the late Brian Bond. He was also a keen photographer. He worked for BR, and using his Continental Rail passes, we'd already been to Austria, Germany and France to photograph steam. Luckily, his father was a guard on the Bakerloo line, at a time when underground trains still had guards, and he agreed, when he was on late turn one evening, to escort us into Neasden depot. And so it was, because they all knew him, nobody challenged us, and once he had navigated us to the steam shed, he left us in order to clock on for his duty. And we spent the next hour or so happily using what little available light there was to record the 57XX 060 pannier tanks preparing for their duties. We also found ESL 118, ESL electric sleet locomotive, used for spraying de-icing fluid on open sections of the line during winter, a former T-stop pier of driving motor cars. After a spell on the Spa Valley Railway, I believe they ended up at Quainton Road, thus returning to the Metropolitan line, which was their proper home. We also noted a 1938 stock driving motor car which had clearly been involved in a bump, and we admired the castellated power station, which had ceased supplying electricity to LT only the previous year and would be demolished within weeks of our visit. Finally, and with several rolls of FP4 to develop, we said our goodbyes to the friendly drivers and fitters that we had met, made our way out to the North Circular Road and probably to the nearest pub for a pint after a very satisfactory evening's work. I'm certain, however, that doing what we did that evening in 1969 would be impossible today. Even if we got past the front gate, we would, I imagine, very quickly find ourselves at the tender mercies of the British Transport Police. Not that there'd be any point, because the 57XX pannier tanks are long gone, although happily several are now preserved, including every one of those in this film.